Hey guys, 66 here, and today we are going to be going over the top 5 most underrated trap cards / top 5 most unknown yet completely overpowered trap cards that you should be adding into your trap decks. And just to start off the video here, we're going to have a majestic game that I played against Thrift Gaming on stream. This is just a single we had. He's playing Pendulum, which is one of the worst matchups for trap deck, but luckily I went first, so I end up doing pretty well here. And this will serve as an intro as to sort of the backdrop that these trap cards fall into. What I mean by that is that their place is firmly found in a true trap deck, where your deck is a majority trap cards, and your goal is to set 5 or set 4 at the very least. And even going second, your goal with these decks is to look at their board, ignore their board, enter battle phase to bait them if you want, because you don't need your battle phase, and then just set. End your turn. And on their turn, you obliterate them. You wait for them to enter battle phase or try to kill your traps, and you just clear their whole board on their own turn. And then they look at you like, what happened? And you outgrind them. It's absurd how good these decks are. And I don't even play super well here, but that one Solemn Strike shut down his Pen Summon. And now I'm just ahead for the entire rest of the game. And there's nothing that Thrift can do about it. Goes for a play here. He needs to get something done, otherwise he's going to get outgrinded. He has time, so I can't target with traps, but I have the Prison for his Selene. He needs to go in and try to clear my board, but I'm just not going to let it happen. And then from here, Phoenix. And this will be number 5 on the list. Maybe it deserves to be higher, but we're just going to go over it first. Vanity's Call. So what this card says is activate only as Chainlink 4 or higher. Pay half your life points. Negate the activation effects of all other cards in the same chain and destroy them. So what happens here, he Pen Summons, he goes Oath, Harmonizing. So that's 2 effects on summon. If these go off, he's able to take over the game, make access code, do what he needs to try to come back, because I don't have any board wipes left. But that's 2 chain links. You might be thinking Vanity's Call is useless, even if they pull off 2 chain links, which isn't super common, but you'll see that. It's so rare that they'll use a 3rd effect in a row for you to Vanity's Call them. Well, here's the thing. It doesn't all have to be the opponent's effect. What I do here is I chain Scarlet Engrave after 2 effects. 2 chain links, right? He's like, yeah. I start laughing. He's freaking out on stream because he knows that I play this card because I've told him about it. And what do I do to make it live? I activate Scarlet Effect Engrave. Chainlink 3. Chainlink 4 Vanity's Call. Everything in that chain gets negated. And from here, it's over. There's nothing you can do. He goes Hulk. Go for this. He only has 1,000 life points left. Game over. Simple as that. So number 5 is Vanity's Call. This card is actually incredible. Here's the applications. Number 1, it's a counter trap. What are the good counter traps? Solemn Strike, mostly, right? That can just negate a monster effect. This is relevant because decks like Dragon Link, which is kind of dead, and more importantly, Drytron, can put up multiple negates that can just kill all your traps, stop them all from activating, and there's nothing you can do about it. Obviously, having 3 cards in your deck is not enough to consistently beat Drytron going second. You need more options. Well, that's where Vanity's Call comes in. With Herald specifically, it's even easier. You wait for them to use a card, then you use a trap in response, and then they're going to negate it with Herald, obviously, right? Because they don't know what shenanigans you're pulling off. So they use Herald negate, and then Vanity's Call. Your card gets negated, but it was going to get negated anyway, so you don't really care. Their Herald dies, and the original card effect you were responding to also gets negated, and it dies. Another application. This is a way other than Solemn Judgment to at least outright reboot some of the time. Take this scenario. They use a card effect. You use a trap. They use reboot. That's 3 chain links, so you can Vanity's Call them. Very nice. And if you couldn't out the reboot there, you were getting OTK'd on that turn. So that was the only way you were winning the game, aside from Judgment, is this Vanity's Call. I know there's other ways to stop reboot, obviously, but those ways, I would argue, are even worse. Like Wiretap? You want to play Wiretap against Drytron? You're screwed. They're going to combo on you. You need to make use of every card you can get, and Vanity's Call is versatile enough. Another scenario, let's say you're facing down even an evenly matched or a feather duster, you can sack 2 of your own cards and then use Vanity's Call. That sounds horrible, you only have 2 back rows left, but let's say one of them was an Eldritch card that floats, or anything that floats for that matter, or let's say one of them was a Grave effect that you could use on the opponent's turn, like the Eldritch Traps, like Backjack, which we'll get into in number 1. You can use some of those effects and waste them just to Vanity's Call, because if the Feather Duster or the evenly matched resolves, the opponent instantly wins the game. There's no coming back. This will hurt you, but it's a worthwhile sacrifice in order to not get completely steamrolled by these absurd board wipe cards. So your main weaknesses in Trap Deck, which are plentiful amounts of negates, like the Herald, which you shouldn't have a way of dealing with, and board wipes, anti-trap cards that just destroy all your back row. This deals with your 2 greatest weaknesses in a trap deck, and yeah, it's cumbersome, yeah, it requires sacrifices, yeah, it's difficult, right, it's situational, but the situations where it works are the most important situations, and the sacrifices you have to make are worth it in order to have a chance in those games. So that's number 5. And coming in at number 4, we have a card that you've probably never even heard of, and that is Chain Hole. So let me read this card real quick, because you probably have no idea what this does. When your opponent activates a monster effect in response to a card effect or activation, negate that opponent's effect. Then, your opponent can banish 1 card from their hand or deck with the same original name as that negated card. If they did not, you can banish 1 random card from their hand. Now, it may not be immediately obvious just when Chain Hole is active, so I'm going to give a few examples here just to illustrate how often this will be live. Number 1, when the opponent has a monster card that works as a negate. In other words, Makaba, Herald, Savage Dragon, Dragite, Dragoon. Any of these cards can be negated by Chain Hole when they attempt to negate one of your cards. Which means that not only does your card go off, Chain Hole also gets to resolve and use its effect. Another instance would be something like Ray. Ray's tag out effect is super annoying for trap decks to deal with, and strikers in general are just a difficult matchup for most trap decks. Another instance, this one's super common, is when they have simultaneous effects, they chain them together, and this can negate the last one. Now, sometimes they'll put the worst effect on the last one to play around strike, so this won't be as strong. But because of its extra effect, on top of just negating a card, it's still pretty good. And sometimes they'll play around Ash and actually put a better card at the end just to dodge Ash, in which case the Chain Hole obviously gets even better. So there are actually quite a lot of instances where this is a good card. Drytron, super obvious. The Herald, that's the big thing you have to deal with. In Drytron, this can aid you in that. Tri-Brigade, even more so. Whenever they start floating and stacking their effects on top of each other, this is live. Sky Striker, difficult matchup, deals with Ray super well. Invoke. Invoked is another big example because when they go for the Maximus, their effects on Grave, when they float, happen at the same time, which means that you can negate one of them. And that's without even considering the next part of the effect, which makes this card actually worthwhile rather than just a cute gimmick, which is that they have to either banish a card from their hand or deck with the same original name, or banish a card from their hand. And what this means is it's either allowing you to outgrind them or go plus by banishing a card from their hand. If you can get the Rays out of the opponent's deck, if they're already out of Rays and this card banishes a card from their hand, now you're getting card advantage, and that's what you need to beat Sky Strikers. Against Herald, they only play 1 of the ultimateness. Some decks maybe play 2, but that's rare. Usually they just have 1 ultimateness. This means that they're going to have to banish a card from their hand. Against Dragoon, same thing. They can't send a Dragoon, right? They're not going to have that in most instances, which means you're going to be able to take a card out of their hand. And there are so many instances like this. Against Tri-Brigade, for example, let's say, okay, they do have more copies of their Tri-Brigade cards. Well, now what's happening is that you're getting rid of them. Another thing that's super problematic is Zeus. If they Zeus you on end phase, and let's say you're deep into grind game, you don't have that much back row anymore, you have cards in hand because you know what you're up against. So it's not over once they Zeus you. You can use a Chain Hole and then get rid of their last Zeus, you know, cripple them, get rid of their best card, or get rid of their card advantage in hand in order to outgrind them. This card's super good in the grind game when it's able to banish cards right out of the opponent's hand. This ends up being a +1 most of the time. And sure, it's only live in specific cases, but those specific cases are, 1, actually quite common if you think about it, and 2, threatening situations that you want to have a card to deal with, and Chain Hole does that beautifully. Now, moving on to number 3, we have a more popular card that you've probably at least heard of and know the effect of, but I think it's worth including in here anyways because it doesn't quite get enough respect, and that is Broken Line. When a spell, trap card, or monster effect is activated in this card's column while this card is set, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy that card. In other words, this card is a going second card. You can main deck this, especially if your deck is tailored to go first or second at equal capacity, or even just going first. There are situations where this card can work very effectively, but for the most part it's a going second card, and it's tech to deal with very specific problem cards, mostly Herald. Herald is a massive problem, and we've been hinting at it the whole time here, where it can stop so many traps by itself by having multiple negates. But if you have a spell speed 3, like we talked about with Vanity's Call, it instantly shuts down the Herald. Advantage of Broken Line is that you don't have to pay any life points, and that it's just as consistent as the Solemn Strike against the monster if you set this into the monster. Going first, this card seems a lot worse. In reality, there are ways to make this work. One is that opponents aren't necessarily playing around it, and oftentimes they can't play around it. If you set 5 and put this in the middle, this will stop more than 30%, I'd say. Around 30 to 50% of Feather Dusters, Evenly Matched Lightning Storms, will go right in the middle when they see set 5, and Broken Line will stop it. Also, if your deck can take up the extra monster zone, you can set this on the other extra monster zone, and now if they link summon, you have sort of a guarantee that this will stop it. And throughout the course of a game, in a grindier matchup, in a matchup where you're not getting OTK'd immediately, even if you're going first with this and it's dead for a couple turns, eventually the opponent is likely to use a card into this and eat that negate. So this doesn't require too much talking about, though I would like to include an honorable mention here for a card that serves a very similar role, and that is Divine Wrath. If your deck has a significant amount of floating effects, Divine Wrath is an incredible card because essentially it does the same thing as Solemn Strike. It's able to go second against a full board of negates and say, no, my board wipe will resolve, you cannot negate it because you can't respond to this, and clear the board. So it's a very specific card, but it's very good at doing what it does, and another advantage is that it will rarely ever brick. At number 2, we have a ridiculously powerful card that people write off as a joke because it looks like one, it sounds like one because of the coin toss effect, and that is Fiend Comedian. This card is actually bonkers, and people just aren't realizing it. What does this card do? You might have heard of it because it is somewhat popular, but no one really plays it. Toss a coin and call it. If you call it right, banish all cards from your opponent's graveyard. If you call it wrong, send a number of cards from the top of your deck to your graveyard equal to the number of cards in the opponent's graveyard. This sounds like a coin flip effect, where one effect is good and one effect is bad. Scenario 1, you hit. You call it right. What happens? You win the game, basically. Most decks right now, if you banish their entire graveyard, have nothing left. Drytron, you banish all their Drytron names and their fairies engraved. Their Evas are dead. Their ritual spells aren't working anymore. They can't do anything. They're done for. Strikers, you banish all their spells and their rays. their effects don't work properly. They can't make good plays. They're just done for. Invoke Dogmas. This one's a bit more resilient, but still, you banish all the cards in their graveyard. They're still in a rough position. If they're going first and they have a board set up, okay, they can still play through it, but if they were going second, you Fiend Comedian them, they're just done for. They can't do anything at that point. Most decks right now will instantly lose the game if you resolve a Fiend Comedian and banish their entire graveyard. That's just how the game is right now, and that's probably how it will continue to be going forward. So 50% of the time, this card can just win the game if it goes off. Scenario number 2, you miss. How many cards does the opponent have in grave when you use Fiend Comedian? 5 minimum, probably? 10? 15? What does that mean for you? You mill that much. So if your deck has grave effects, if you have Eldritch cards, if you have Shaddoll cards, if you have Burning Abyss cards, if you have Phantom Knight cards, anything like that, if you have any good grave effects, this is going to get you 1 or 2, right? If they have 10 cards, and you mill 10 cards, you can get 2 grave effects on average. You just won +1. And again, that's the bad 50%. You had a 50% chance of just winning the game outright. That sounds like a great deal, doesn't it? It is a great deal. This card's amazing either way. There is some deck requirement, which is that you have grave effects. But hint, hint, you're playing a trap deck. You want to outgrind your opponent. Granted, there are some trap decks without grave effects. Mech Knight trap, okay, fine, sure. Magispector traps, you can think of them, right? But given that you're not playing those, and instead you're playing Eldritch, you're playing Burning Abyss, Salamangreat I would count as a trap deck because that's how I play Salamangreat. And let's just move on to number 1, which is a beautiful, beautiful card known as Dark Sacrifice. This card's insane. Let's read it. When your opponent activates a card or effect that would destroy a card on the field, negate the effect, then send 1 level 3 or lower dark monster from your deck to your graveyard. What does this mean? Negates Feather Duster, negates Lightning Storm, negates Twin Twisters. What more do you need, honestly? You don't get board wiped. And then on top of that, negates Herald. So that just goes 1 for 1. And then on top of that, send a level 3 or lower dark from your deck to your graveyard. So this is almost like a cost to being able to negate Feather Duster for free. But because there are really good level 3 or lower dark monsters, it's a benefit. And not just a small benefit, a huge benefit. Introducing Absolute King Backjack. We've been talking about this for a bit because this card is just so good. And it has so many applications. But this is the main application. You send it off Dark Sacrifice. Let's read this. During your opponent's turn, quick effect, you can banish this card from the graveyard. Excavate the top card of your deck, and if it is a normal trap, set it to your field. Otherwise, send it to the graveyard. Okay, so feels like an RNG card. You might get a set, but you might just mill something. Whatever. Let's keep going. That set card can be activated during this turn, so okay, if you get lucky with the Dark Sacrifice, it's like a free trap. It replaces itself instantly while negating a card. That sounds really good. This has another effect. If this card is sent to the graveyard, you can look at the top 3 cards of your deck and then place them on the top in any order, as hard ones per turn on both. In other words, if any of my top 3 cards is a normal trap, the Dark Sacrifice instantly replaces itself. Huh, that sounds really good, doesn't it? And oh, what? I also get to stack my deck, so I can control my draw next turn. I can choose my top deck. Oh, that sounds really good too. And wait a second, since I'm stacking, I can stack a floating card, a grave effect, in the case where I don't have a normal trap, and that just gets milled. So then the Dark Sacrifice wasn't as good, but I still got to look at my deck, I still got to stack it, and I got grave effect while negating Feather Duster. That sounds pretty good too, doesn't it? And there's more. There's more. If I miss completely and there's nothing good, I can use any of my traps that interacts with my deck. I can use another Dark Sacrifice, because not once per turn. I can use a Scarlet, for example. I can use any trap that interacts with my deck. Trap Trick, even. And then I get a 4th try, so to speak. If all 3 of the cards I saw on the top of my deck were bad, and I don't want any of them, and none of them can get set, and they don't float, I can go for a 4th try. What are the odds that one of 4 cards on the top of your deck are a normal trap card or a grave effect? Exceedingly high, astronomically high. So that's your number 1, Dark Sacrifice. Put this in like every trap deck. If your deck is losing to Feather Duster, play Dark Sacrifice. It's that simple. No questions asked. Because even going second is good. You can stop Herald. And you can stop turn 3 Feather Dusters. And you can stop Phoenix. And you can stop Levianeer. This card is ridiculously good. Play this. Alright? If you're playing a trap deck, play Dark Sacrifice. So that's gonna be all for today, guys. Take care, y'all. Goodbye.